Lovely. Well, I'd now like to invite our speakers to join us at the front here for our question time. And of course, since Ian's given a plug for the City of London Festival, I can't but raise the point, but in January 2014, we will be running a Mondays at 1 series of lectures on battlefield medicine and the role of military musicians in time of peace as stretcher bearers and medical assistants in time of war will appear in that. We'll have a very good lineup of people. We've had all sorts of very interesting phrases, I think. I liked the idea of dehumanizing your enemy. So I wondered then about, rather I didn't like that idea. I like the idea of rehumanizing your enemy, which might be something we could talk about. We heard about de-escalating and depolarizing, and I'm very interested in the Ds and Disses of negotiation, so that might be something which we can talk about. The new idealism, I think a lot of people pricked up their ears when they heard a QC talking about idealism. I'm glad this lecture is being recorded. And of course, the key focus of Geoffrey's speech was that the legal system has nothing to do with ending conflict or bringing about reconciliation. We might therefore like to think what possibly can. And then this wonderful thought that music, which of course you think of Aesop's fable and the trumpeter on the field of battle who says, "Please don't kill me, I only have a trumpet," and the other soldier says, "Yes, but your trumpet will encourage the enemy," and shoots it. So little literary reference there for you. So how should we start? Could we perhaps start with the D's and the Re's? Simon, if you talk about dehumanizing your enemy, how could we go around rehumanizing them? Because if you see your enemy as human, as you suggested, it's much harder to feel that sense of animosity which came up on the right-hand side of your triangle.
Start with that. I can't quite pick up the question. The rehumanization. Yeah. How does one actually approach achieving rehumanization?
If you think of reconciliation as first and foremost a process of rebuilding relationships, it's not an out there political process, it's about actually the re-establishment of a network of relationships that create community. Then rehumanizing is about a number of things. It's first of all about enabling people to deal with the events of the past, both perpetrators and also victims. And it's one of the things that I'm very interested to talk to you about is the importance of truth-telling as the essential mechanism of reconciliation in divided communities. Now, the thing about rehumanization is that what happens in conflict is that people end up living distorted versions of their lives. That they lose the ability to function in relation to other people in the way they would in a time of peace. That may be because of violence, it may be because of fear, it may be because of trauma, it may be because of a particular role that they're asked to play, all of which distance people from the essential what I believe to be the essential good nature of humans and their ability to relate to each other peacefully. So I'd want to start the conversation by talking about the real importance of, and I think you both alluded to this, the importance of talking about what has actually happened in conflict, the truth, not the propaganda, and in particular the importance of the perpetrators of violence being able to own up to what they have actually done as the liberating mechanism of reconciliation.
Yes. Geoffrey, would you like to come in on that? Because you were rather pessimistic about people wanting to be reconciled. What would your view be from your experience with the International Criminal Court?
Sorry, my view on?
Well, the importance of truth, given your pessimism about reconciliation.
Well, I don't, by the way, we don't need this microphone, do we? We're all right with that?
No, you're okay with your...
Well, what I didn't get round to saying, but which is, I think, immensely important, is that these tribunals, whether they succeed or fail in other ways, are immensely valuable in the record of events that they lay down, that people can turn to when they're tempted in decades to come to return to a conflict on the basis of a false conception of what happened in a past conflict. But more important, that these records are invaluable in showing people how it is possible for the majority of us, no doubt, to commit the most awful crimes when things happen to come together in a certain circumstance. Whether the laying down of ever more information of this kind will in fact help the human race to survive as opposed to destroy itself, we don't know. But at least it gives it the opportunity. So I think that the quantity of information and reasonably accurate information that's available is invaluable. And of course, in these cases, particularly where the defendants cross-examine themselves, the witnesses, subsequent generations can say, well, that was the evidence, and it was actually tested by the person who we now want to put up as a hero. So that's invaluable. The last point, if I may, on the same topic is the reverse point. We should not ever overlook the way information is distorted for political and military purposes. Germans bayoneting babies in the First World War, Belgian babies. In the Second World War, Churchill had, as he willingly concedes, the Russians eating their babies until such time as the Russians became our allies, and he had to send a man called John Platts Mills, a well-known communist, Olympic sportsman, lovely bloke, barrister as it happens. He was already too old to fight, and he commissioned him to undo the propaganda he had done to mislead the British public. And now if you want to dig around, you can find what I believe to be a monstrous story that's being told about the Kosovo Albanians, variously pinned on one leader or another, that they were killing Serbs to harvest their organs in Albania. It was a quick shoot, cut open the body, whip out the kidney and put it in a poly bag. Oh yes. And this is used to demonize a nation to this day, and it's probably without any foundation.
Of course, Winston Churchill was famous for saying that if the devil declared war on Germany, he would at least make a favourable reference to him in the House of Commons. So I think perhaps he was trying to reverse out of what was by then a rather difficult situation. Right. Yes, please.
On the humanising aspect of music, which it can, I think, prove more readily than words, which can be distorted to put things wrongly. And I think that because music is such a basic human impulse, one can also say that it can be a very humanizing influence in itself. People in the arts would say that one definition of the arts is it holds up a mirror to the world so it can see itself in a truthful way. And whether that's true actually or not, there's no doubt in my mind that there are humanizing gifts that we have in society that can be brought to bear. And I've seen it happen very often through music and through other arts as well.
There, of course, ways forward this Spike Milligan in his autobiography, Adolf Hitler, My Part in His Downfall, asked for leave to go and play his trumpet in a band, and the commanding officer said, how can you do this with a war on? So he said, every time I think of Hitler, I'll play a wrong note. And apparently got his leave. Now, we have time for questions. James, are you the man on the mic? James is the man on the mic. You have to catch my eye. I catch James's eye, and the lady down here has the first question. Do please bear in mind we have people in the overspill room downstairs. They won't hear you without a microphone. Madame.
Okay. My question is actually to Simon Keith, and it's a bit more of a theoretical question about your disagreement success. It's a very good analysis of disagreement and how, system of deliberation and decision making. But would you say that one's culture and the country that they are from determines how they determines or alters the way they argue? So would you say that your model is one fit for all, or does it take into consideration where they're from, how they were brought up, their own their background, basically? And the second question is, again, do you does the model only work on people who have, on two different parties that have completely separate, different ontological positions? Do they have to completely disagree from the beginning, or can you work on people who have the same ontological position, but sort of, disagreements arise somewhere, and obviously there's conflict to begin with? So those are questions.
Okay. No, I think your first point is a really good one about cultural traditions of argument and disagreement. In fact, I'm married to a Tibetan Buddhist, and Tibetans have the most amazing tradition of debating, which to a Western Anglo-Saxon like me is immensely intimidating. They shout at each other, they wave their arms, but it's a culturally extremely good way of very quickly getting to the heart of things. I would say the principles that we've tried to elaborate of disagreement success are general, but actually they might be applied in different ways in different cultures. I mean, the most obvious example that I've come across in our work is conversations between Muslims and non-Muslims, where all kinds of cultural assumptions can complicate things a lot. And so we found there's quite a lot of time needed to get people to explain where they're coming from and actually ask questions. And in particular, one of the feedback loops in disagreement success, if you like, is if you say something to me and you're not quite sure I've understood it, you can ask me to repeat it to you until I've got it right. And now that may sound a little bit laborious, but it's actually a wonderful way of getting people to tune in. And once it's done once, people start listening much more carefully. So, and that's quite an important thing. But I think I'd be very happy to think a little bit more about what the other cultural dimensions of this were. Just remind me what your second point was.
The ontological position. So people, the two parties that are arguing, does the disagreement success model, does it only work on people who have different ontological positions? So they just completely disagree about the topic from the start. So they have to be completely different ontological positions. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it, if I understand what you're saying, I think it applies in both those situations. I mean, its real value is where you observe or you see the potential for a disagreement to spin out of control and for polarization to start. And that it could be something as simple as discussing chicken and egg, or it could be discussing something as powerful as the genocide in Rwanda. So it's simply a mechanism for managing a particular type of difficult conversation. The subject, I think, and the content is actually, in my experience, it can be used, and contain quite a lot of diversity, as it were. Yeah.
Yes, I think the Padre had a question. So you had a question? Yes, James?
My question, I think, is to Ian, because it is somewhat similar to the first question that was asked. And it's the fact that all these discussions take place within a context, and to get it's not necessarily a common context. I mean, for instance, if in your music in the summer, will you be having, is it just Western music? Is it Western classical music? Or, have you, the music of Afghanistan and ghazals and music which we're not used to hearing, etc. Because that could be where, that's the wider context. Yes. That I think is necessary if we are to discover common truths. We need to make the contexts in which these things are discussed and debated as wide and comprehensive as they should be.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think it's true to say, and you'd only have to read through the brochure to see that it is predominantly a Western classical tradition that is espoused by the festival, but not exclusively. And we've explored different themes in different years where music from different parts of the world are actually brought together, shared. Some really interesting experiments that we undertook 4 years ago with a sarod master who had his own very particular frame of reference in his music. I mean, we're not talking about conflict in the sort of sharp and harsh sense here, but we're talking about relationship building between a great master of one particular way of music making, coupled with a Western orchestra. And the only way that that actually became ultimately a success, and a success enough for the work then to be taken all the way around India as well, was by spending a lot of time sharing, exchanging, trusting, and giving ground, sharing ground, and creating something that was greater. So the process of making that music was in a way, it was a role model for some of the things we've perhaps been talking about, but actually its purpose was to create a project to make a good concert happen. It so happens that this year, actually during the course of the conference we're putting on, there's going to be the example, in fact, of a singer, a musician from Africa, from the Congo, who's going to be showing the work that she has been doing with one of my colleagues who has actually put together a whole ensemble, a whole choir of people from completely different parts of the world who together have decided that by singing together they're actually going to achieve something more, and the result's incredibly moving. So I think that this is something that crosses many different cultural boundaries, but one can't do justice to everything.
Can I add something to that? Yes. I mean, we use music quite a lot at Snettelberg, in a slightly different way, which is where we see music as a kind of passport that can take you into other people's cultures, lives, experiences. So we often invite musicians, poets, storytellers from areas of conflict to come and describe, using their artistic gifts, what their lives are like and what their traditions are like. And that can be an incredibly direct way sometimes of seeing the world from someone else's position. For instance, in a couple of weeks' time, this is a plug, we have a musician from the Western Sahara, which is an area greatly contested at the moment between Mauritania, Morocco, and actually most of the states around there. And we've invited, rather than have a conference talking about it, we've invited a musician to come and share her culture from that area, and she'll show pictures of it, and she'll discuss it as well as performing. And I think that's a very powerful use of music, this idea of being able to take you into someone else's world. So in that sense, I think it speaks directly to some things you were saying about the direct power of music to change people's views of others.
Yes, Geoffrey, I think you wanted to...
Lest this symposium should become too homogeneous, and despite the fact that I'm immensely impressed by everything that Ian does and agree with it and can't wait to learn more, I want to ask him a question that troubles me. Some of you will have seen the film Conspiracy, a wonderful BBC film that deals with the Wannsee Conference, where the fate of the Jews was decided by a committee of bureaucrats and party people presided over by Heydrich and his deputy Eichmann. The film ends wrenchingly with Eichmann putting on a gramophone record of a Schubert, a quartet, I think. And that, although the whole thing is based on an extant record of the conference, well edited down, but nevertheless, and we certainly don't know if the gramophone bit is real. But Heydrich was a talented violinist. How should we deal with the fact that people of considerable musicality can nevertheless deliver such evil?
It's a huge subject.
So I won't even mention Wagner at this point in the discussion. So, John. James, could you get around to John?
I didn't get an answer yet.
Not yet.
We thought that was a rhetorical question, my lad.
It wasn't. I really wanted an answer.
Sorry, my discomfort follows on exactly from Geoffrey's example, because I think another feature of the Wannsee conference was that a majority of them had PhDs.
Sorry,
a majority of the participants in the Wannsee conference had PhDs.
Oh, they were, yes, they were mostly, many of them were qualified lawyers,
Yeah.
the majority.
So in
Many of them were under the age of 40.
But it was
Yeah.
part of a more general unease, which was that one of the threads between the three contributions was about the importance of truth-telling. And I was thinking that there's a danger of that being a positivist thing, that there's one truth. I don't think that's what you meant, but it worried me. And so that got me thinking about, and also that there's asymmetry, which again Geoffrey highlighted, which is that it's extremely difficult to prosecute states in the context that we've got, and you know, the Americans not taking part in the International Criminal Court and all of that. So there are lots of issues about asymmetry in these things as well, and the state-sponsored music and the state-sponsored dialogues and so on are all problematic, which got me thinking about the Quaker tradition of truth-telling and so on. And I think two things, one of which is not using the word truth as much as witness, which I think has some resonance. And the other was the idea of telling truth to power, which starts in the 18th century and gets revived in the Second World War and then gets revived in the Cold War, all about saying, actually telling the truth about what war is doing to people and how we haven't got right on our side and so on has been a powerful tradition. So I just wondered if the panellists would comment on that.
Have you flummoxed our panel?
You've foxed us a bit, actually.
Sorry?
I'm foxed.
Well, I'll just make one observation, but I don't really think it's an answer to your question, most of which, but not all of which, I heard. I'm afraid I heard most of it. And it's this business of there not being a single truth, but there being a desire to set down evidence or set down witness. I entirely agree with that, and that's why my first point, that these trials are actually immensely valuable, but if you look at the transcript without necessarily judging them. But there's a slightly different point on what we aren't going to call the truth, which I think I wanted to make at some stage, so I'll use your question to make it now. Then you There are things that are truths that we refuse to acknowledge because it's terribly inconvenient to acknowledge them. So that in the setting of society in conflict, like our society is in conflict or was in conflict 2 years ago when people burnt down bits of the town. We all know, because it's unarguable, that the people who did it would have behaved entirely differently had they been swapped at birth with the children of the Gloucestershire ruling class. Now, it's an inconvenient piece of information. We don't want to know it because it's too expensive to remedy. But when you come to look at conflicts that put the world at risk, the truth that will come from the witness and the evidence is another uncomfortable truth, and it is the truth that I've touched on already, and we all have, that we can all do these things. And what we need more than the ability to stop an instant conflict is the willingness to face up to that information, if it's true or not, that we would all be there at the Wannsee conference nodding the destiny of the Jews through if circumstances operated on us as it operated on Stuttgart and all the others.
There was that rather awful experiment conducted in the United States, wasn't there, where students were in two groups. A lady's nodding, she might remember when this was, where one half were being directed by an interrogator to apply electric shocks to students who were being wired up, and the students applying the electric shock thought it was a game, and the students wired up realised that it wasn't. And obedience experiment, thank you very much. You can all find it on Google. And the terrible thing was these terribly reasonable, perfectly nice American students actually sort of spent the afternoon torturing their friends because that's what they'd been told to do, which of course I think became known as the Nuremberg defense. They were told to do it and therefore they did it. Is that?
Sorry, louder?
The Nuremberg defense was that they were told to do it and therefore they did it.
Some of them were, yeah.
Yes. I'm afraid
Can I just
time...
come
yes,
back on
quickly.
that truth issue? Because it is one that is much discussed in this field. I mean, I think there's a pragmatic view of truth, which is the truth that isn't a lie. Just a couple of examples I'll give. One is, if anyone has looked at the reports of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the sort of mother of, I think there have now been 35 similar exercises around the world in various forms, that if you look at the actual testimonies of the perpetrators talking in front of some of the victims and actually saying, yes, I actually did this, that is a truth that actually has a huge cathartic impact. It may not be the whole truth, it may not necessarily be a legally defined truth. I have the feeling there's something going on behind my head, but...
So I was just resetting the pictures.
That would be one. The second thing to say is another example of that is you talked a bit about Rwanda and the huge difficulties of confronting the genocide through that kind of legal machinery when 10% of the population is in prison. It takes 150 years, someone calculated, to pursue all those cases through the court. So what do you do? There's been a lot of interest in reverting to a tribal form of court called the Gacaca court, where the individual perpetrator is allowed back, potentially, into the community in which he or she committed the crime, if they stand up in front of the village and actually say, this is what I did and I'm sorry for it. And that kind of truth-telling is not an absolute truth-telling, it's not a legal kind of truth-telling, but my gosh, it's a very powerful political form of truth-telling. There are all kinds of problems with that model as well. But I think one of the great thinkers in the world of reconciliation is someone called John Paul Lederach, a Mennonite theologian. Many of you will be familiar with him. And he talks about reconciliation as being a place where 4 different qualities or values are held in balance, and they are mercy, truth, justice, and peace. And there's a very interesting conversation to have about which bits of that 4 sort of structured process the legal system can provide, and it does provide some of them. I think that's in that context, the telling of truth has a very particular power if it is seen as part of the potential exercise of mercy, the exercise of justice, and the maintenance of peace.
Lovely. I'm afraid it is a firm Gresham tradition that we finish at the hour as advertised. I also have to point out there's a glass of wine, either getting cold or getting warm, not very far away from here. I would like to thank our panel and just to draw the events to a conclusion so that we can finish on time. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your contributions. I think they deserve a round of applause. Yes, I suppose it all hangs actually, I mean, being the linguist, I want to bring this actually to the fact this all depends entirely on the language that you use. The phrase I always come back to is the honest truth. When teacher says, tell me the honest truth, part of you says, hang on a moment, there's only one firm truth, surely. The other one, of course, Geoffrey must have worked a lot with interpreters in his time, and of course the cultural element is particularly strong here, because of course the way in which you argue, the way that you present your case, does indeed change from one culture to another. And of course it is extremely difficult when you have a concept in one jurisdiction which doesn't exist in another. Bail is a classic because in this country where we now use a lot of interpreters, some of the accused think that by someone else paying bail, they've effectively paid a fine to get them off. And they don't understand the fact they've actually got to come back again because in their home culture that wouldn't actually happen. So the point to one side. Now, we did mention rehumanising and dehumanising, so I really must put up this slide. There are 9 pages of words in the Oxford English Dictionary, beginning with the word dis, every one of which would allow you to write an essay on the subject of conflict resolution. We don't have to read them all out, but just look at them there. And if you look up D, there are even more. So I did come across, now I'm going to say this word publicly so it will never ever be used again, the word deconfliction, meaning to reduce the level of conflict in a given area. But I sincerely hope nobody associated with Gresham College will ever use a word like that. Now, I did mention, wanted to be superior, that I was actually going to, I had already worked into my lecture that I was going to talk about peace before the First World War. 3 Men in a Boat, which must be one of the happiest books in the English language, written by Jerome K. Jerome, who I think is the man sitting in the group of the three actual friends, they were friends. George in the book was actually a Pole by the name of Carl Henschel, and they spent long Edwardian days rowing up and down the river. And when they were slightly older, there was a sequel to Three Men in a Boat called Three Men on the Bummel, which is a kind of wandering tour around Germany. And it was written in 1900, and it's a light-hearted, whimsical view of Germany, such that it was used as a school textbook for many years to show young Germans what the English thought of them. And at one point, Jerome reflects on the increasing tension between England and Germany, 1900, and he suggests that the German government should send over teams of lank-haired, pipe-smoking, beer-drinking German students in order to allay English fears. Now listen to this, 1900. You cannot be amused at a thing and at the same time want to kill it, says Jerome. War with such, they will say, it will be too absurd. And in 1914, he volunteered for service in France with the British Red Cross. He was rejected because of his age, and whereupon he went and volunteered to work with the French Red Cross, spent 4 years in the front line, and his biographer says that the experiences he had near the front line with wounded men undoubtedly shortened his life. Now, we can't finish on a totally miserable note. Can I find the picture? Yes. The King of Spain and the leader of the illegal Spanish Communist Party. Nice, happy story from the transition to end on. In December 1976, the man on the right, Santiago Carrillo, who was the proscribed Secretary General of the illegal Spanish Communist Party, came back to Madrid. He'd been in exile in Russia for 40 years and dared the police to arrest him because, of course, there was a question as to whether the elections in 1977 could include communists as well as fascists. And the Spanish government took a deep breath and said, yes. Now, I couldn't find it, I wish I could, but I realized things were going to go well when I saw a picture in the Spanish paper of the King of Spain, who is a non-smoker, handing an ashtray to the leader of the Spanish Communist Party, who was a chain smoker. And at that point I thought, well, we're on the road to somewhere. That, of course, is a photo taken much later in life, but I couldn't find the one of the ashtray and the cigarettes, but it was too glorious to be true. Now, there we are, 1 minute to 5, 2 things I have to do. First of all, I hear the echo of Neville Chamberlain's remark at the time of the Munich crisis, but we really cannot ignore places which are no longer so far away, and if we know nothing about them, then more's a pity, and that's our fault. Now, we do have to say, thanks to various people, I have to mention our sponsors because they give us the money, and if they gave us some more, we'd be extremely grateful, the Mercer's Company and the Corporation of the City of London. I do have to thank the staff of Gresham College. Huge amount of work goes on behind the scenes. I always breathe a sigh of relief, because things always do run smoothly, but knowing that they have done makes me feel so much better, and that is as a result of a lot of work done by people who actually don't usually see, so very much my thanks to them, and of course to our distinguished panel for their time and contribution today, Sir Geoffrey Nice, Ian Ritchie, Simon Keyes, who have given up their time to share their thoughts with us for what I think has been a very interesting, worthwhile and beneficial afternoon. Gentlemen, thank you.